to honor and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the state of Colorado, the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. Further, I acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. Acknowledging that I live in the homelands of Indigenous peoples recognizes the original stewards of these lands and their legacies. With this land acknowledgement adapted from the University of Colorado, I celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to the fields of medicine, mathematics, science, engineering, arts, and more. I also recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have developed in relationship to their lands. I respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land, and I pledge to provide opportunities for Indigenous students, faculty, staff, and others to participate in advancing the mission of Sea Change Biomedicine. The American Association for the Advancement of Science's Sea Change Biomedicine, a component of Sea Change, was created to meet the needs of the health and biomedical sciences. The U.S. National Institutes of Health Office of Research on Women's Health provided the initial funding for this component of the Sea Change initiative. Since October of 2019, we have collaborated with stakeholders to build a framework, process, and metrics that account for the structures, relationships, and populations of the biomedical sciences, such as individual medical colleges or entire academic health and biomedical sciences centers. We launched the inaugural Sea Change Biomedicine Bronze Award pilot in November of 2021. We are piloting our framework for Sea Change Biomedicine and meeting with members of Sea Change Biomedicine self-assessment change teams as a cohort to build a collective change community. The cohorts are also learning communities for the change teams and staff. The challenges and opportunities of Sea Change Biomedicine and the framework and practices of the Bronze Award pilot are deeply informed by our national context. 2020 was very impactful for a myriad of reasons, including in terms of racial and social justice. There was the tragic murder of George Floyd by police officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota, just 2 months after the police killing of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. These high-profile killings fomented sustained nationwide protests against the unjust and disproportionate police killings of Black Americans that were captured on video or otherwise rose to prominence. The 2020 protests against racial injustice shook the country deeply and not only led to calls for systemic changes in policing, but also to higher education institutions and others making public statements in support of taking actions to serve diverse populations within their own institution by addressing barriers to creating just, inclusive, and equity-minded environments. For Sea Change Biomedicine, these events, combined with the way that COVID-19 showed a light on dramatic and deadly health disparities for Black, Latino, and Native American populations, led us to incorporate guidance in our framework that directly supports our members in considering their own institutions' relationships to policing. It also led us to provide guidance on how to consider the promotion of health equity for patients and communities. Additionally, we expanded the section on pedagogy and practice to not only ask questions about teaching the history of racism and its intersections with other isms, but also to consider how specific practices within health settings have long histories rooted in incorrect notions of biological differences as a function of race, and thus embedded notions of racial inferiority in the very practice and teaching of medicine. The knowledge and practices rooted in our racist history also amplifies and builds upon the systemic nature of structural racism through the determinants of health, such as access to healthy food, housing, jobs, and education that contribute to Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples showing up in the healthcare system sicker and with less of the resources needed to achieve healthy lives. We also wove throughout the guidelines questions to consider given the impacts of COVID-19 on students, trainees, faculty, and staff. For example, we focus attention on caregivers who are disproportionately women and socially expected to care for parents and children while working full-time, which obviously puts a strain on their ability to not only care for themselves, but also to meet requirements related to promotion and advancement, most notably meeting publication requirements. As several recent studies have shown, women have fallen behind in publishing due to the pandemic, and this will have reverberations not only on their individual career trajectories, but throughout the academic enterprise for years to come. In short, our national context, necessarily given our history, has deeply informed the work that we do. When we use a lens that considers gender, ethnicity, race, and other identities, in part, we are raising awareness and instilling practices that support systemically transforming institutions to welcome all women and people of color as students, trainees, faculty, and staff, and to ensure that they feel a sense of belonging so they are in a position to contribute to the overall scientific and biomedical enterprise long-term. This is not only crucial to the institutions themselves, but to scientific excellence, innovation, and the health of all people. Thank you.